Flight attendant questions black woman's first-class ticket, then learns she's the investor who funds the airline. Sometimes a single encounter can expose the hidden biases we carry, and in the most unexpected places. Imagine settling into a comfortable first-class seat, ready to embark on a long-awaited journey, only to have your presence questioned. That's exactly what happened to Ebony Waters, a successful venture capitalist, when she boarded a Delta Airlines flight for a business trip that should have been routine. Little did anyone know, Ebony wasn't just a first-class passenger, she was also an influential investor, with the power to reshape the very airline she was flying. And in the next few hours, everything would change for Ebony and for everyone watching. Ebony Waters stepped out of her sleek black town car in front of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, smoothing the wrinkles from her tailored ivory pantsuit. She rarely wore white, too easy to stain. She'd joked for years, but today felt special. This was no ordinary trip. She checked her watch, 2:45 p.m. She was well on time for her 4:30 p.m. flight to Los Angeles. This trip marked a milestone in her career as a venture capitalist. Having spent over a decade investing in promising startups, Ebony had recently branched out into more established ventures, including a substantial stake in Delta Airlines. She had grown up in a modest household in Atlanta, under the watchful eye of her widowed mother and her grandmother, both of whom worked hard to ensure that Ebony would have every opportunity in life. They encouraged her to study, to aim high, and to believe she deserved a seat at any table. Ebony had taken those lessons to heart. She graduated from Howard University with honors in finance and immediately dove into the competitive world of venture capital. Through a mixture of grit, brilliance, and uncanny instincts about people's potential, she built a name and a fortune for herself. But Ebony never forgot where she came from. Whenever she passed through the airport that symbolized her hometown, she felt a surge of pride. Today was no different. Her gold-buckled heels clicked smartly against the polished floors as she made her way to the Delta Airlines check-in counter. She rolled a single carry-on behind her. She'd learned to travel light despite her success. Dressing elegantly didn't need to mean hauling an entire wardrobe. "Good afternoon, ma'am." The check-in agent greeted her warmly. Ebony smiled and handed over her passport and first-class ticket. The agent scanned it, gave a respectful nod, and returned the documents. "Have a wonderful flight. Your gate is 5, and boarding starts in an hour." Ebony felt a small thrill each time she flew first class. It never got old. But what excited her the most right now was the hush-hush meeting she had arranged in Los Angeles with top airline executives. She planned to expand her position and funnel more capital into Delta, believing strongly in their mission and route expansions. This was the airline that had carried her countless times from East Coast to West Coast, and it felt almost poetic to help steer its future direction. She headed towards security, mentally ticking off tasks for the week, finalized the pitch deck for the new biotech startup. She was courting, respond to the philanthropic foundation requesting a donation for after-school programs, and confirm with her lab-based partner about a new real estate opportunity. Ebony's mind was always on the move, just like the planes outside the terminal windows. Security was relatively quick, though Ebony noticed a few curious glances from travelers who didn't expect to see a black woman in a pristine designer pantsuit breezing through the TSA pre-check line. She was used to it, but never grew entirely comfortable with the implicit suspicion she sometimes felt. Still, she offered a polite nod to the TSA agent, who waved her through without incident. The airport lounge near her gate beckoned her with plush leather chairs and complimentary beverages. Ebony checked her phone, no urgent messages, so she decided to step in for a short break before boarding. She also needed to mentally prepare for that meeting in La. A moment of calm would do wonders. Inside, Ebony settled into a quiet corner, ordered a sparkling water with a twist of lemon, and took out her tablet to review a few notes. She had 5 new emails about potential startups to fund, and an equal number of messages from her personal assistant regarding scheduling. With practiced efficiency, she began to draft replies. The lounge was only moderately crowded. She half listened to the chatter of fellow first-class and business travelers, some discussing mergers and acquisitions, others talking about corporate relocations. Conversations in such lounges often revolved around deals or next-level expansions. Ebony felt at home in this environment. She thrived on it. Time slipped by quickly. Something about the hushed atmosphere made the minutes vanish. She glanced at her watch again. Boarding would start soon, and she wanted to be ready. Gathering her belongings, she headed for Gate 5. She noticed nothing unusual, no signs of conflict brewing, no hints that her calm journey would soon be disrupted in a most unexpected way. Yet, as Ebony approached the boarding line for first-class passengers, she sensed a faint tension in the air. She handed over her boarding pass. The agent scanned it without comment and waved her forward. Ebony offered a polite smile, took back her pass, and strolled down the jet bridge, her heels tapping the metal walkway. If she had known what awaited her inside, that Boeing 767-767's cabin, perhaps she would have steeled herself for battle. But Ebony was simply excited to settle in, catch up on some reading, and maybe savor a glass of champagne once the seatbelt sign clicked off. She had no reason to suspect her presence would soon ignite a chain of events that would challenge her composure and rattle everyone on board. As Ebony entered the first-class cabin, she admired the wide seats and ample legroom. It was like stepping into a cocoon of luxury, separate from the cramped bustle of economy class. She found her seat, 2A, a window seat near the front, with a personal overhead compartment. Gently tucking her carry-on above, she settled into the spacious seat. Within moments, she felt her stress begin to melt away, replaced by that small, secret smile. She reserved for moments when she realized just how far she'd come. The flight attendant assigned to first class, a tall, honey-blonde woman named Caitlin Reeves, made her way down the aisle. Her uniform was immaculate, her posture confident. She was greeting passengers, offering pre-flight beverages, and ensuring everyone was comfortable. When Caitlin reached Ebony, though, her polite smile faltered for a moment. It was almost imperceptible, a flicker of uncertainty or surprise, but Ebony caught it. She was used to noticing small signs of discomfort when people realized she was not what they expected. "May I get you anything to drink before we take off?" Caitlin asked, forcing her expression back into what Ebony liked to call flight attendant neutrality. "I'd love a glass of champagne, if possible," Ebony replied, handing over a friendly smile. She intended to extend courtesy and warmth, as she always did. "Sure," Caitlin said, then paused and glanced at the seat number. "Ticket for 2A?" Ebony nodded, a small crease forming between her brows. It wasn't unusual for flight attendants to confirm seat assignments, but she heard an odd note in Caitlin's voice, something cautious or even doubtful. Still, Ebony shrugged it off. People had questioned her place in boardrooms and executive suites for years. The tension usually eased once they realized she belonged just as much as anyone else, if not more so. "Of course, I'll bring that right to you," Caitlin concluded, but Ebony sensed an unease drifting in the flight attendant's eyes. A few minutes later, Ebony was browsing the in-flight menu when she overheard a hushed conversation between Caitlin and a second flight attendant, a younger man named Devin, who was working the opposite aisle in first class. Ebony couldn't catch every word, but she heard enough to piece it together. Caitlin was questioning Ebony's presence in that seat. Phrases like, "Are you sure?" And don't see people like that often up here, floated through the half-drawn curtain from the galley area. Ebony's chest tightened, and she felt a pang of indignation rising. She chose not to confront them yet, hoping it was a misunderstanding. Maybe Caitlin was just verifying seats or remarking on Ebony's sense of style. Ebony tried to give people the benefit of the doubt. She knew how easily miscommunication could occur. Moments later, Caitlin returned with Ebony's champagne. The attendant placed the glass on Ebony's tray table, then hovered a moment too long. Ebony smiled politely, though her pulse had quickened slightly. "Is there something else?" Ebony asked softly, keeping her voice calm. "I just need to confirm your boarding pass one more time," Caitlin said. She tried to sound apologetic, but Ebony detected a hint of suspicion swirling beneath the surface. "There's been some confusion with seat assignments." "Of course," Ebony replied with a measured grace. She handed over her pass. Inside, she felt her temper bristle, but she kept it under tight control. She was a professional, and she wanted to handle this situation with poise. Caitlin examined the pass, then cast a quick glance at Ebony's ID. "All right, Miss Waters," she said, returning them. Her tone held an edge. "We just wanted to be sure everything was in order." Caitlin moved on to another passenger, and Ebony exhaled slowly, willing herself to remain calm. She sipped her champagne, focusing on the bubbly sensation and trying to quell the sense of humiliation creeping over her. She reminded herself that she was here on legitimate business indeed, business that could shape the future of Delta Airlines. She was no ordinary passenger occupying a seat. She was a major shareholder. If she wanted, she could have rung up the company's executive floor directly to address any confusions. But Ebony decided to give Caitlin a chance. Perhaps this was a one-time mistake. Perhaps once the flight was in the air and Ebony was quietly reading her file on the next big biotech project, the tension would dissipate. She'd always believed that sometimes people acted from ignorance and fear, rather than outright malice. And Ebony, who had shattered many biases in her career, believed in second chances. The cabin doors closed. The aircraft prepared for takeoff. Ebony fastened her seatbelt, feeling the engines rumble beneath her. Normally, this was one of her favorite parts of flying, the raw power as the plane lifted from the ground, that sense of possibility. But she found herself distracted by the swirl of uneasy thoughts. She had come to expect better from Delta, given her history with the airline. As the plane roared down the runway and lifted into the sky, Ebony gazed out the window, the lights of Atlanta slowly vanishing beneath the wings. She tried to shake off the lingering negativity. Soon they'd be at cruising altitude, and she could get some real work done. Life was too short to let ignorance ruin a flight. She was determined to rise above, literally and figuratively. But Ebony would quickly discover that Caitlin's inquiries were far from over. The tension would build, culminating in a confrontation that would leave Ebony and everyone else in first class shaken to the core. And by the time Caitlin realized who Ebony truly was, it would be too late to take back the damage done. Once the seatbelt sign turned off, Ebony unfurled her tray table and placed her tablet on it, ready to finalize a crucial presentation for her upcoming meeting. She inserted her noise-cancelling earbuds, hoping to tune out the rest of the cabin and sink into her work. However, her eyes were irresistibly drawn to the figure of Caitlin, who seemed to be flitting from passenger to passenger with an agitated air. It was subtle. Caitlin still wore that polished flight attendant facade, but Ebony noticed the extra politeness with certain passengers, the averted gaze when passing Ebony's row, the nervous tapping of her foot when she paused. Something about Ebony's presence in first class was clearly unsettling her. Ebony couldn't help but recall the moments in her life when she'd been underestimated. She remembered stepping into her first interview at a prominent venture capital firm. The interviewer, an older white man in an impeccable suit, looked her up and down with barely concealed shock, as if trying to reconcile Ebony's credentials with her appearance. She'd aced that interview, eventually surpassing him in the ranks. She also remembered times in her childhood when neighbors whispered that her family would never go far. Yet here she was, an investor with a portfolio that spanned tech, real estate, and yes, airlines. Her phone screen glowed softly with the Delta press release she had been reviewing, a new route expansion to international destinations that Ebony had helped push for. She was proud of this initiative. More connections meant more opportunities for people worldwide. But ironically, she found herself dealing with small-minded discrimination right on a plane belonging to the airline she'd bet on. She forced her attention back to the presentation, scrolling through slides about second quarter earnings, operational costs, and potential strategies for growth in the face of rising competition. The glow of the tablet illuminated her calm yet resolute features. Her mind was racing with figures and timelines, but a large portion of her brain was waiting, expecting another confrontation. 15 minutes later, Ebony's intuition was proven right. She removed her earbuds momentarily when she noticed Caitlin standing in the aisle near her seat, addressing the man in 2B, a middle-aged businessman wearing a navy blue suit. Ebony caught a glimpse of the man's name on a gold-trimmed luggage tag, Samuel Whitaker. He was flipping through the in-flight magazine and looked surprised by the flight attendant's question. "I'm sorry, Miss Reeves," he said, glancing at Ebony, "but I don't see what someone else's seat has to do with me." Caitlin's face flushed. "I'm just trying to ascertain if Miss Waters might have switched seats with someone. The manifest had changes someone cancelled last minute, so there could be an error." Samuel shrugged. "I didn't see anyone switch seats. She's been here since boarding." Ebony shut off her tablet and placed it aside. She couldn't pretend this was normal. Clearing her throat softly, she addressed Caitlin, who seemed to be going out of her way to avoid eye contact. "Is there a problem with my seat assignment?" For a split second, Caitlin looked like a cornered animal. Then she composed herself, but her tone came out clipped. "We've had issues with seat theft on recent flights. People sometimes sneak into open seats after the door closes." Seat theft, Ebony thought grimly. Right. Because a woman like me surely couldn't afford first class. She felt an old anger stirring in her chest. She leveled a polite but firm gaze at Caitlin. "I checked in properly, had my boarding pass scanned, and you yourself verified it a moment ago." Caitlin's eyes flickered to Ebony's crisp outfit, to the embossed tablet case on her tray. She paused, and Ebony could almost see her internal gears turning. "Yes," Caitlin finally said, "but I needed to confirm it with the passenger next to you, just to ensure there was no confusion. There have been times when an agent accidentally gives out the same seat to two different people." Ebony said quietly, "Has there been any sign of that problem today? Because from what I can see, nobody else is claiming 2A. A tense hush hung in the air. Passengers in nearby rows were starting to watch, uncomfortable. Some cast sympathetic glances at Ebony, others, unsure what was happening, simply looked on with curiosity. Ebony felt her cheeks flush. She was used to indignities, but not like this, not so publicly. Caitlin cleared her throat. "We'd just like to be absolutely certain. Thank you for your cooperation, Miss Waters," she said, emphasizing Ebony's last name as though it were a question. Ebony's eyes flashed, but her voice remained steady. "If you have any more questions, feel free to bring the senior flight attendant or the pilot, if that's more appropriate. Otherwise, I'd appreciate being able to enjoy my flight in peace." Caitlin's mouth formed a thin line. She gave a curt nod and hurried off to the galley. Ebony exhaled a trembling breath, returning to her seat. She noticed that her neighbor, Samuel, offered her an apologetic shrug, as if to say, "I'm sorry you're going through this." She nodded in thanks, appreciating the small gesture. But Ebony's mind was no longer on her presentation or the new routes. She couldn't ignore the tightness in her chest or the sting in her eyes. It was a reminder that, even with all her success, She still had to defend her right to be where she belonged. She might be signing deals that shaped markets, but to this flight attendant, she was just another suspicious traveler who didn't fit. She considered calling a contact she had on Delta's board or shooting an email to the airline's VP of Customer Relations. But Ebony tried to weigh the consequences. She preferred solving conflicts calmly. She also despised the idea of playing the "I'm an investor, so back off" card. She wanted to be treated with dignity simply because she was a human being who deserved it, not because of her wealth. Yet, part of her recognized that if she did reveal her status, it might not only humble Caitlin, but also teach the airline a valuable lesson in training its staff to handle implicit bias. Ebony made a mental note to bring this up discreetly in her upcoming meeting in Los Angeles. A flight attendant publicly challenging a first-class passenger's legitimacy more than once was an incident that needed addressing at the corporate level, especially if Ebony was going to pour more capital into the company. For the rest of the climb to cruising altitude, Ebony tried to immerse herself in her work. She forced her focus onto the data in front of her, not the flight attendant's side glances or the tension thick in the air. She made minor tweaks to slides, wrote bullet points for a potential marketing campaign, and jotted down questions for the executive board. But every so often, her mind wandered back to the sting of injustice, and she realized with grim acceptance that this was likely far from over. Cruising at 35,000 feet, the plane leveled out, and the flight attendants began the cabin service for first-class passengers. Devin, the younger attendant, passed out warm towels and took dinner orders. Ebony requested the grilled salmon and watched as the other passengers called out their choices. She noticed that Devin was friendly and respectful, offering Ebony a genuine smile. He asked if she needed anything else, and Ebony thanked him politely. She decided not to drag him into the tension with Caitlin. If anything, Ebony was grateful for Devin's kindness. Caitlin remained in the galley, occasionally stepping out to consult with Devin or pass something to a passenger. Ebony could feel the tension radiating from her. Once or twice, Ebony caught Caitlin shooting her a look that bordered on resentful. It puzzled Ebony why cling to this suspicion. Ebony reminded herself that sometimes prejudice ran deep, and for some, it was easier to double down than to admit they might be wrong. After dinner was served, Ebony took a few bites of her salmon, sipping water in between. She wasn't particularly hungry. Her appetite had diminished thanks to the unpleasant undertones still coloring the flight. She glanced around the cabin at passengers engrossed in their meals, their in-flight movies, or their laptops. Samuel in 2B was reading a thick binder of what looked like legal documents. Occasionally, Ebony felt the warmth of his glance, as if he was silently checking if she was all right. Once dinner trays were cleared, the lights dimmed slightly to allow people to rest. Ebony decided to try and sleep for a bit. The meeting in Los Angeles was early the next morning, and the last thing she needed was to be tired and stressed. She reclined her seat, covered herself with a light blanket, and closed her eyes. She must have dozed off for about half an hour before a subdued commotion stirred her awake. Rubbing her eyes, Ebony saw that Caitlin was kneeling beside a middle-aged woman in row 4 who seemed faint and was pressing a hand to her chest. A wave of concern replaced Ebony's annoyance. Flight attendants were moving quickly, retrieving oxygen and offering comfort. Devin made an announcement asking if there was a doctor on board. Instantly alert, Ebony sat up, scanning the cabin. Several passengers, including Ebony and Samuel, craned their necks to see if the woman was all right. A hand shot up from across the aisle, a young woman who introduced herself as a nurse practitioner. She moved to row 4, reassured the flight attendant, and began tending to the passenger. For a few tense minutes, Ebony waited with bated breath, feeling her heart hammer. The possibility of a medical emergency at 35,000 feet could overshadow any personal grievances. Caitlin handed the nurse practitioner various medical supplies from the flight's emergency kit, her voice trembling slightly as she recited protocol. The sick passenger sipped water, took deep breaths, and slowly her color returned. After about 10 minutes, she seemed stable enough. The nurse practitioner confirmed that it appeared to be a brief episode of dizziness, possibly low blood sugar. With the crisis momentarily resolved, Ebony watched as Caitlin took a moment to gather herself in the galley. Despite the tension between them, Ebony felt a pang of empathy. Flight attendants had a challenging job, one that required them to juggle safety, service, and passenger well-being all at once. She understood that stress could exacerbate underlying biases and behaviors. Still, Ebony's sympathy didn't erase the sting of being unjustly harassed. After verifying that the passenger in row 4 was okay, Caitlin resumed her duties. The cabin settled into a quiet lull, with most travelers resting or watching their screens. Ebony tried once more to rest, but found sleep elusive. She felt that something unresolved still lingered between her and Caitlin, an ugly tension that might erupt again. She put on her earbuds and listened to soothing jazz, hoping to calm her nerves. An hour later, Ebony decided to stroll to the lavatory. Stretching her legs in the aisle, she noticed Caitlin at the galley's edge, flipping through some paperwork. Ebony was just about to pass by when Caitlin abruptly blocked her path, looking startled. She clutched a small binder close to her chest. "I need a word," Caitlin said, voice low and urgent. Ebony raised an eyebrow, not expecting this. She folded her arms, glancing around to make sure no one else was within earshot. "All right, I'm listening." Caitlin's eyes flickered nervously. She stepped closer, dropping her voice to a whisper. "I checked your details again. You're flying on a corporate code. That means the ticket was purchased through some kind of business account, correct?" Ebony regarded her with cool composure. "Yes, that's correct." Caitlin exhaled sharply, as though Ebony had confirmed a suspicion. "Then why are you traveling alone, Miss Waters?" she asked. "Usually, corporate accounts are used by teams or employees traveling together. Are you sure you're not using someone else's details?" Ebony stared at her, incredulous. Anger flared, but she refused to show it. She kept her tone level, though her voice was laced with cold steel. "That's confidential. And I don't see how it's your business who I'm traveling with or why." Caitlin's posture stiffened. "I'm just trying to protect the airline's interests. We've had—" "Stop," Ebony said firmly, cutting off Caitlin's explanation. "You're making assumptions about me without any evidence. You've verified my boarding pass and ID. If you have concerns, escalate it to your senior or the pilot. Otherwise, this conversation is over." For a moment, Caitlin looked like she wanted to say more. Her lips parted, but no words emerged. Instead, she gave Ebony one more hard look before stepping aside, letting Ebony continue to the lavatory. Ebony's face felt hot, her heart drumming. Protect the airline's interests? Ebony thought bitterly. If only she knew how much of a stake I have in this company's success. Once inside the lavatory, Ebony locked the door and braced herself against the small sink. She took several deep breaths, focusing on the rhythmic hum of the plane's engines. She looked in the mirror, assessing her reflection. A surge of emotions collided in her chest: anger, shame, sadness, defiance. It was exhausting to always have to prove she belonged, no matter how successful or wealthy she was. With a shaky sigh, Ebony pulled her phone from her pocket. Though it was in airplane mode, she considered drafting an email to her contact at Delta, explaining the situation, but again she hesitated. She wanted to handle this privately, not create a spectacle. Maybe she would wait until after landing, then address it in her meeting. She was determined that the flight attendant's behavior wouldn't go unnoticed or unchallenged. When Ebony emerged from the lavatory, the cabin was dim, and most passengers were either watching movies or napping. She returned to her seat without another word to Caitlin, avoiding the galley. She slid into her seat, fastened her belt, and forced her gaze out the window. The clouds outside glowed silver in the moonlight, an ethereal layer that calmed her slightly. She wished she could talk to someone, her mother, her closest friend, or even her philanthropic advisor, who had become a mentor of sorts. She could almost hear her mother's soothing voice. "Don't you let anyone steal your dignity, Ebony. You've earned your place, don't forget it." Clinging to that memory, Ebony closed her eyes again, hoping against hope that the rest of the flight would be uneventful. But deep down, she suspected the real confrontation was yet to come. And as the plane soared into the night, Ebony steeled herself for whatever lay ahead, determined not to allow prejudice to overshadow her journey or her purpose. Roughly an hour later, the pilot announced upcoming turbulence. The seatbelt sign glowed overhead, accompanied by a slight jolt as the airplane met an unsettled patch of air. Ebony fastened her belt more securely, fully awake now. Her mind raced not just with the discomfort of the flight, but also the tension simmering beneath her exchange with Caitlin. The lights flickered momentarily as the plane lurched, prompting a few gasps in the cabin. Devon, still calm, moved through the aisle to ensure everyone was belted and to collect any stray cups or glasses. Caitlin, however, seemed on edge. She handed Ebony a fresh bottle of water, her posture stiff, avoiding eye contact. Ebony thanked her curtly, not wanting to be rude, but also not looking to make small talk. The turbulence intensified for several minutes, rattling the overhead bins and sending a ripple of unease through the passengers. A baby cried somewhere in economy, the sound echoing painfully through the hush. Ebony focused on her breathing, reminding herself that turbulence was normal. It would pass. Soon enough, the plane leveled out again. The baby's cries receded. Devon made another pass, offering reassurance to any passenger who appeared anxious. Caitlin disappeared behind the curtain that separated first class from the rest of the cabin, presumably to check on other passengers or speak to a colleague. Ebony welcomed the respite from her presence. As Ebony released the breath she didn't realize she was holding, she felt a tap on her shoulder. Turning, she saw Samuel from 2B leaning over with a concerned expression. "Sorry to bother you, Miss Waters," he said softly, "but I couldn't help noticing the tension earlier. Is everything okay?" Ebony paused, glancing around to ensure Caitlin wasn't hovering nearby. She lowered her voice. "I'm fine," she said with a small, polite smile. "Just a misunderstanding with the flight attendant, I suppose." He nodded. "I see. Well, if there's anything I can do, like if I need to confirm your seat again or something, I'm more than happy." His tone was earnest. Ebony's smile grew a bit warmer. "Thank you, that's kind of you. I appreciate the support." Samuel settled back into his seat, and Ebony returned to staring out the window, collecting her thoughts. Part of her wanted to share the whole story with him, her investment in Delta, her frustration with Caitlin's assumptions, but she held back. It wasn't the time or place for that. Still, she was grateful for a small pocket of human kindness in an otherwise uncomfortable experience. 30 minutes later, Ebony flipped open her tablet to review more documents. She was halfway through a complicated financial report when she noticed a figure looming beside her seat again. Looking up, she saw Caitlin. The flight attendant's face was taut, her fingers gripping her service tablet. Ebony braced herself, her mind racing. "What now, missing?" "Waters," Caitlin said in a hushed but tense voice, "I need to speak with you privately." Ebony glanced around. Most of the cabin seemed engrossed in entertainment or dozing. Samuel from 2B watched them from the corner of his eye, concern etched into his features. Ebony's lips tightened. "Is there an issue that can't be discussed here?" Caitlin pressed her lips together. "It might be better if we step over to the galley." Ebony weighed her options. A part of her wanted to refuse. But another part was curious. Perhaps Caitlin was finally going to explain herself or, if luck had it, apologize. Ebony sighed and rose from her seat, smoothing her pantsuit jacket. She followed Caitlin to the galley, where the bright overhead light gave everything a stark, clinical feel. The rumble of the plane's engines was louder here. Caitlin positioned herself between Ebony and the curtain, as though trying to ensure they wouldn't be overheard. "I've looked into your passenger record," she started, voice low. Ebony's eyes narrowed. "And you have the authority to do that. As a senior flight attendant, I can check details for security and billing purposes," Caitlin replied tightly. "I see you have some corporate privileges. But that doesn't explain certain anomalies in the booking." Ebony stared at her, exasperation building. "What anomalies?" Caitlin took a step closer, her voice dropping. "I've never seen a passenger with an investment badge on their record, especially not for a major airline partner. I don't even know how you managed that. But it says—" She paused, swallowing. "It says you have some kind of investor priority code attached to your ticket. That's not standard." Ebony inhaled sharply. So the system had flagged her corporate investor credentials. Usually that was a silent code, known only to upper-level management, ensuring Ebony and a handful of other high-priority stakeholders had a comfortable travel experience. She never expected a flight attendant to question it so aggressively. "I don't see how my investment in Delta is your concern," Ebony said, her voice measured but firm. "If the airline system gave me that code, it's because I am who I say I am." Caitlin's face paled slightly, but she pressed on, as though refusing to concede. "Well, I'm not used to seeing something like that, and I needed to verify. I can't just take it at face value. I'm protecting the airline from potential fraud." Ebony's anger flared. "Fraud? You're accusing me of fraud? Listen, I've had my ID and ticket checked multiple times. If you had doubts, you should have escalated this through official channels hours ago. Instead, you've interrogated me repeatedly, humiliated me in front of other passengers, and singled me out without cause." Caitlin's expression flickered with defiance, but Ebony caught a trace of uncertainty beneath it. "One, I'm just doing my job." Ebony leaned in. "I have no doubt you have a tough job. But this isn't just about verifying a seat anymore, is it? If I were dressed differently or looked different, would I be going through this?" Silence. The only sound was the steady hum of the engines. The tension was so thick, Ebony could practically taste the hostility. Caitlin's eyes darted away, then back to Ebony's. Something unspoken passed between them, a clash of Ebony's righteousness and Caitlin's stubborn mistrust. Finally, Caitlin swallowed. Her next words came out stiff. "If you can just provide some documentation or something to prove this is legitimate, we can clear this up." Ebony's indignation soared. "Documentation? You've seen my boarding pass and ID, which match the name on the reservation. That's all the documentation I need as a passenger. You have no right to demand any more. If you have a problem, we can call the captain or contact ground control, but I suspect you won't like how that conversation will go." Caitlin's cheeks reddened. She clearly wasn't sure what to do now that Ebony refused to produce any further proof. She opened her mouth, but no words came. In that moment, Ebony decided she'd had enough. She pulled her phone out, still on airplane mode, and showed Caitlin a recent email header from a Delta executive's domain, though Ebony didn't open the email. Just a flash of the name in the subject line. "See that name? That's the Vice President of Partner Investments at Delta. I have a meeting with them tomorrow morning in Los Angeles. When I land, I'll be letting them know exactly how I was treated on this flight." Caitlin's face blanched. Her jaw dropped slightly, as though she wanted to refute Ebony's claim, but found no words. Slowly, Ebony put the phone away, took a breath, and stepped back. "If you'll excuse me, I'm going to return to my seat. I'd appreciate no further interruptions. Ebony slipped around Caitlin, who stood rigid as a statue. For a split second, Ebony almost felt sorry for her. But then she remembered the discomfort of being interrogated, the humiliation of having to prove she wasn't a fraud. She brushed aside any pity and returned to her seat with her spine straight and her chin held high. As she sat back down, Ebony felt a tremor of adrenaline. She had barely raised her voice, yet the exchange felt deeply charged, like a storm had passed between them. She noticed Devin glance her way, concern in his eyes, but Ebony merely gave him a polite nod, silently communicating that she was fine. Ebony slipped her earbuds on again, a quiet sense of resolve settling over her. Soon the flight would land in Los Angeles, and she would not let this go. She planned to detail the entire incident to the higher-ups. This wasn't about punishing a single employee. It was about confronting the ignorance that allowed situations like this to happen in the first place. Little did Ebony know, the next couple of hours would bring more turbulence, literal and metaphorical, before the plane touched down. And when it did, the consequences of Caitlin's actions would reverberate far beyond this single flight. The final 2 hours of the flight were punctuated by intermittent pockets of turbulence. Some passengers grew restless, fidgeting in their seats, while others tried to sleep through the bumps. Ebony remained alert, her confrontation with Caitlin burning in her mind. She jotted down notes on her tablet, documenting every interaction times, locations, specifics. She wanted an accurate record for her post-flight conversation with Delta leadership. During one particularly jarring jolt, Ebony gripped her armrests, feeling the plane dip and then right itself. She heard the clatter of dishes in the galley. Devin's voice came over the PAR system, reassuring everyone that they were experiencing a normal patch of rough air and asking them to remain seated with seatbelts fastened. Ebony glanced across the aisle to see Caitlin strapped into a jump seat, her face rigid with tension. The seatbelt sign remained illuminated for a solid 20 minutes as the aircraft navigated stormy conditions. Finally, the pilot announced they were moving into smoother air, and the jostling diminished. Relief washed through the cabin like a collective sigh. As the plane found steady air, the flight attendants rose to resume their service. Devin came around, offering a final beverage service before landing. When he reached Ebony, he leaned in discreetly. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry if there's been any inconvenience during this flight. If there's anything you need, please let me know." Ebony smiled gratefully. "Thank you, Devin. I'm fine for now." He nodded, handed her a bottle of water, and continued down the aisle. Ebony took a sip, feeling touched by Devin's empathy. Even if Caitlin was giving her a hard time, at least the rest of the crew wasn't piling on. A short while later, Ebony's tablet pinged with a low battery warning. She fished out her charger and realized she needed a power port. She leaned down to find it beneath her seat, only to discover that it wasn't working. With a small sigh, Ebony stood and checked the port next to her seatmates. Also dead. "Strange," she muttered. Deciding to ask for assistance, Ebony pressed the call button. A minute later, Caitlin appeared, her expression guarded. "Yes, Miss Waters," Ebony forced a polite tone. "My power port doesn't seem to be working. Could you reset it, or is there another port I can use?" Caitlin offered a stiff nod. "I can try resetting the ports from the panel. One moment, please." Ebony waited as Caitlin disappeared, presumably to access some controls. She returned after a minute. "Try it now." Ebony plugged in her charger, but nothing happened. She looked up at Caitlin with a mild shrug. "Still not working." Caitlin frowned, a hint of frustration flickering over her features. "We might have a technical issue. I apologize, but there might not be much we can do mid-flight. If you need to charge something urgently, I could see if a seat in row 1 is free, though I believe it's taken." Ebony appreciated the offer, though it came through gritted teeth. "It's all right. Thank you for trying." Caitlin nodded and turned away. Ebony sighed, resigning herself to low battery life for the remainder of the flight. She placed her tablet aside and tried once more to relax. 10 minutes later, Ebony felt a sudden tap on her arm. She looked up to see the passenger behind her, an elderly man wearing a comfortable sweater. He apologized for disturbing her, but said he'd overheard that her power port wasn't working and offered her use of his. Ebony smiled warmly, thanking him for his generosity. She declined for now, though, adding she might take him up on it if her tablet became critical. Once again, Ebony found herself touched by a small act of kindness amidst the negativity she'd faced. The flight was a microcosm of the world, she thought, pockets of prejudice and ignorance contrasted with moments of genuine empathy. She resolved to focus on the latter, at least for the next hour, until they landed. At long last, the pilot announced the initial descent into Los Angeles. Passengers dutifully returned seatbacks and tray tables to their upright positions. Ebony stowed her tablet and took a deep breath, mentally preparing for the city's bright lights and busy energy. She was usually thrilled to land in La, a city bursting with opportunity. But now she felt a growing knot in her stomach, dreading how she would have to handle the fallout from this flight. She gazed out the window as the plane began its final approach. The sprawling city lights stretched out in all directions, a mesmerizing tapestry of humanity. She found herself both anxious and resolute. Her meeting with Delta executives was scheduled for tomorrow morning, but she had a feeling that her first order of business would be to address this incident. She'd do so calmly, professionally, and thoroughly. As the wheels touched down on the runway with a gentle thud, Ebony felt a wave of relief. The flight had been turbulent both literally and figuratively. She unbuckled her seatbelt once the plane slowed, checking her watch. They'd arrived about 20 minutes behind schedule, but still in time for Ebony's evening hotel check-in. Passengers began to deplane. Ebony stayed seated, allowing the rush of people behind her to move forward. Samuel from 2B rose, retrieving his luggage from the overhead bin. He caught her eye and gave her a small smile. "Hope you have a better day tomorrow," he said quietly. "Safe travels." "Thank you," Ebony replied, appreciating his kindness once more. She turned to gather her own carry-on. When she looked up, she was surprised to see Caitlin standing in the aisle, as though waiting for her to pass. Ebony maneuvered out of her seat, her carry-on in hand, and stepped into the aisle. The tension between her and Caitlin was palpable. Ebony was prepared for another awkward exchange, maybe even a grudging apology. But Caitlin merely pressed her lips together and gestured for Ebony to exit. "Have a good evening, Miss Waters," she said, her tone flat. Ebony gave a curt nod and walked past her, stepping onto the jet bridge. Part of her felt a twinge of regret that the conversation ended on such a tense note. But she reminded herself that she owed Caitlin nothing more. The time for courtesy was over. She'd attempted it multiple times. Now, Ebony had to focus on the bigger picture, making sure this kind of treatment wouldn't happen again. Not to her or to any other person who was unfairly profiled. As she entered LAX's bustling terminal, Ebony felt her phone reconnect to data. It vibrated with a string of waiting notifications. She scanned them quickly. A text from her personal assistant about tomorrow's meeting location, a couple of emails from her philanthropic advisor, a new pitch deck from a hopeful entrepreneur. Business as usual, except Ebony herself was far from calm. She gripped her phone, stepping to the side of the corridor to let other travelers pass. A surge of determination welled within her. She pictured the elegant conference room where she'd meet Delta's senior leadership. She imagined laying out her concerns plainly and firmly, demanding accountability and structural changes so that flight attendants like Caitlin wouldn't single out legitimate passengers, especially due to biases about who belonged in first class. Her suitcase wheels hummed against the polished airport floors as she headed for baggage claim. In her mind, Ebony had already begun composing the conversation she would have. She would handle it methodically, the way she handled any business negotiation, with facts, composure, and unwavering resolve. And she wouldn't let personal pride overshadow the bigger goal, ensuring dignity and fairness for every passenger, no matter their background or seat assignment. The day after her turbulent flight, Ebony entered Delta's West Coast executive offices in a sleek downtown tower. She'd come to finalize plans to invest more in the airline, but first, she needed to address the flight attendant's treatment. Vivian Markle, an executive vice president and Ebony's main contact, greeted her warmly. After brief pleasantries, Ebony described her ordeal in first class, how she'd been repeatedly questioned, humiliated, and forced to defend her seat. Vivian listened with visible concern, apologizing on the airline's behalf. She promised a swift investigation, emphasizing Delta's commitment to ensuring no passenger was ever singled out unfairly. They shifted to reviewing Ebony's expanded investment, focusing on route expansions and revenue projections. But both women knew the real priority was the fallout from Ebony's flight. As Ebony left, she felt cautiously optimistic. If Delta truly valued her support, they would address the incident and make lasting changes starting at the very top. Later that afternoon, Ebony headed to Delta's West Coast executive offices in a sleek downtown high-rise. She was scheduled to meet Vivian Markle, the airline's executive vice president of investor relations, a respected leader and Ebony's primary contact since she first took a stake in Delta. Inside Vivian's glass-walled office, Ebony recounted her ordeal on the flight, the repeated questioning, the humiliating accusations, and the tension with Caitlin Reeves. She kept her tone measured but firm, emphasizing she wanted real solutions, not just apologies. Vivian's face paled with concern, and she promised a thorough investigation. "I'm deeply sorry you experienced that," Vivian said. "We have protocols against discriminatory conduct and will address this swiftly. Your investment and your trust matter to us." Ebony nodded, relieved she was being heard. "I've always believed in Delta," she replied. "But if the culture allows incidents like this, something has to change." They concluded by discussing Ebony's plan to invest more capital and expand Delta's routes. But both women knew the priority now was confronting what had happened on board. By the time Ebony left, she felt a cautious hope. If Delta valued her partnership, they would make this right and set a new standard for every passenger going forward. Over the following weeks, a series of conversations unfolded between Ebony and Delta's leadership. They discussed ways to strengthen their training programs, focusing on implicit bias and customer respect. Ebony, using her leverage as a major investor, insisted that any expansions or major initiatives should include a renewed emphasis on diversity and equity within the airline's ranks. Delta agreed, and Ebony saw them begin drafting policies that would reshape flight attendant onboarding and continuous education. As for Caitlin, Ebony heard through Vivian that after a thorough review, the airline placed her on a 3-month probation. She was required to undergo additional training, counseling, and community service hours with organizations that promote racial understanding. When Ebony learned of this, she felt a measure of satisfaction. It wasn't a simple slap on the wrist, it was a structured path toward genuine growth. In the months that followed, Ebony remained in touch with Vivian, occasionally inquiring about the progress of the new training initiatives. Delta, eager to retain her goodwill and capital, invited Ebony to attend a session with new recruits to share her perspective as both an investor and a passenger who had experienced bias. Ebony agreed, seeing an opportunity to help shape the airline's culture. During that session, she spoke candidly about the importance of treating every passenger with dignity, weaving in her personal story of adversity and success. Word spread within corporate circles that Ebony Waters wasn't just an investor, she was a catalyst for change. Other companies she'd invested in reached out, asking for guidance in setting up their own diversity and bias training programs. Ebony found herself at the intersection of business and social impact, precisely where she'd always wanted to be. Occasionally, Ebony thought about Caitlin Reeves, wondering if the flight attendant had truly changed. She hoped so, because Ebony knew from personal experience that adversity could be a catalyst for real transformation if one was open to learning. 6 months after that fateful flight, Ebony boarded another Delta flight, this time from Los Angeles to New York, for a conference on venture capital in underrepresented communities. As she stepped into the first-class cabin, she scanned the faces of the flight attendants with mild curiosity. She didn't see Caitlin among them, which was no surprise. Still, Ebony felt a twinge of reflection. She wondered if all the progress she'd fought for was translating into real changes on the ground. The flight went smoothly. No one questioned her seat assignment or demanded extra documentation. Instead, Ebony received the standard courtesies extended to any first-class passenger. She caught a connecting flight in Atlanta, heading to New York. By then, the novelty of the quiet, respectful treatment made her smile wryly. No drama, no suspicion, just normalcy. Upon landing at JFK, Ebony wheeled her carry-on into the terminal. She was about to call for her car service when a familiar voice called her name. Turning, she saw Devin, the young flight attendant from that turbulent flight months ago. He was off duty, dressed in casual clothes, but Ebony recognized him instantly. "Miss Waters," he said, jogging over. "It's such a pleasure to see you again." Ebony grinned, genuinely happy to see a friendly face. "Devin, right? You were so kind to me on that flight." He nodded, clearly delighted she remembered. "Yeah, that's me. I just landed on a different route." "How have you been?" "Busy, as always," Ebony replied. "I've been working with Delta on some training initiatives and expansions." Devin's face lit up with understanding. "Oh, I heard about that. They've rolled out new modules on cultural sensitivity and bias training. It's been a big deal, lots of internal talk. Everyone says it was sparked by an investor's complaint after a first-class incident." "That was you?" Ebony gave a modest nod. "Yes. I just wanted to ensure the airline took these things seriously." Devin smiled warmly. "We appreciate it. Honestly, the training made a lot of people think about how we handle passengers. It's a good change." Ebony felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. "I'm glad to hear it. That was the goal." Devin hesitated a moment, then lowered his voice. "You know, Caitlin changed routes after her probation. We're not on the same crew anymore, but word is she's doing better. She's been volunteering at a local community center, working with kids from diverse backgrounds. Some say she's a different person now." Ebony exhaled, feeling unexpected relief. "I hope so. Everyone can grow if they really want to." Devin nodded, then checked his watch. "I've got to run to catch a train. But it was wonderful seeing you. Take care, Miss Waters. And thank you." They parted ways with a friendly wave. Ebony watched Devin disappear into the crowd, her heart a little lighter. She headed to the curb for her car service, thinking about all the ways a negative experience could be transformed into positive change. As Ebony slipped into the waiting black sedan, she felt a rush of gratitude for her own resilience, for the kindness of people like Devin and Samuel, for the chance to wield influence that made airlines rethink their training. Life was full of challenges, but also full of opportunities to do better, to push forward, and to grow. She called her assistant to confirm the details of the venture capital conference, feeling renewed excitement for the days ahead. Because Ebony Waters had learned a simple truth: the best kind of power wasn't just financial. It was the power to change minds, to shift cultures, and to ensure that one day every passenger in first class or coach or anywhere would be treated with the respect they deserved. Thank you for joining Ebony Waters on this dramatic journey, where a simple flight became a powerful lesson in fairness, dignity, and what it truly means to invest in change. If this story resonated with you, if you felt Ebony's frustration, her determination, and ultimately her triumph, then help keep the conversation going. Your support can shine a light on everyday moments where biases still persist and remind people that anyone can make a stand for respect and equity. So, let's keep this conversation alive. Like this video, share it with friends who'd appreciate Ebony's inspiring story, and subscribe to my channel for more dramatic and thought-provoking tales. Together, we can raise awareness, challenge injustice, and celebrate the victories that come from standing up for what's right. After all, the journey to a fairer world is one we're all on. Let's keep flying higher together.